Hello, and welcome to Office Hours with Dr. Dan. I'm Dan. This is the first video on the channel, and tradition has it that the first video is supposed to be a little biographical in nature, and then also let you know what you can expect going forward on the channel. As far as my biography, I'll get to that in a minute, but why I'm taking the time to go over a little bit of a biography is so that you can consider whether my life experiences make my advice worthy of your consideration. I don't claim to have all the answers when it comes to advice for college students. Take my advice for what it is. All of my experience as a student and a professor has been in the United States. So if you're a student overseas, definitely a lot of what I'm talking about will still be relevant, but there are cultural norms and places outside the United States that it's not going to translate well there. One thing, my videos are one-shot videos, so don't expect much, if anything, in the way of editing. I'm not here making art. I'm here to try to pass on some information to people that may find it helpful. As far as about me, life before college really doesn't matter for this channel, so we'll just skip right to my undergrad. I got a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology in 1992. My GPA was 3.17, so full disclosure, I was a decent student, but I certainly wasn't a top student. I started off as an electrical engineer because I did an Air Force ROTC scholarship, and at the time, the Air Force was giving, from what I was told, about 70% of their engineering scholarships in electrical engineering. So figured, why not? Ran away screaming from electrical engineering in my sophomore year because we were playing with oscilloscopes every week in lab. There was a lot of programming involved, just things that I was not even remotely interested in. Fortunately, the Air Force let me switch to civil engineering. The electrical engineering prof that I had at the time made the joke of, I raised the average IQ of both departments by switching from electrical engineering to civil engineering. So, funny man, Dr. Grigg. I think he's still teaching all these years later. By being able to switch in my sophomore year, that meant that I was taking a couple of classes out of sequence. I took Surveying 2 before I took Surveying 1. I took Mechanics of Materials before I took Statics. So that made some things more challenging. My professors weren't going to cut me any slack because, quite frankly, they were doing me a favor letting me take the classes out of cycle so that I could still graduate in 4 years, because the Air Force was very big in those days of your ROTC scholarship is a 4-year scholarship at most places, so get in and get out in 4 years, and fortunately I was able to do that. After graduating from Rose-Hulman, there was a wait before I could go on active duty, and I got a job with the Indiana Department of Transportation as a highway engineer doing construction materials testing and project management. Construction materials testing is checking the materials that the contractor is using on a project to make sure they meet the standards and specifications. The project management is filing the paperwork and reports and just bird dogging the contractor to make sure everything's going as it's supposed to be. The projects I worked on while I was there was a roadside rest area on I-70 on the Indiana-Illinois border, and then a roadway realignment project in Terre Haute. In early 1993, I got called to active duty. 4 years in the Air Force from 93 to 97. My bases were in New York and in South Korea. As an Air Force civil engineering officer, that's basically like being a city engineer but with a construction component to it. And I was in the Air Force in between the Gulf Wars, so fortunately never been shot at or under the threat of hostile fire or anything like that, unlike a lot of my friends who stayed in and did careers in the Air Force and are now retiring. So Air Force civil engineering officer was project management, contract management, facilities management, with, again, as an airbase has a lot of facilities, whether it's the runway, the roads, or the buildings, and civil engineering is responsible for making sure those buildings are kept up and repaired. I had some temporary duty assignments to Guam and Saudi Arabia and Okinawa while I was in the Air Force. I obtained my first professional engineering license while I was stationed in South Korea, so I took the test for the Oregon PE license in South Korea. The test was not in Korean, written in Korean. It was in English, fortunately. And during my time in the Air Force, I had both military and civilian personnel that I was either their direct supervisor or the second line supervisor. So I had experience in being a manager. After my 4 years in the Air Force, I found a job in Houston for a company called Fisher Scientific. They are a lab supplier as far as research and medical lab supplies. I was a facility manager and again contract manager and project manager for Fisher, again based in Houston, but I did a lot of travel. They were doing a lot of projects in other states, so I traveled 3 to 4 months out of the year. I had 4 people that I was their supervisor, and my boss was in Pennsylvania, whereas I was in Texas. So a lot of just getting things done and just keeping the boss informed. After my time with Fisher, I went to a company called SEA Limited as a forensic civil engineer, and forensics is failure analysis. Why is the building messed up? How bad was the building hurt when the car went through the building instead of staying in the parking lot? And then you also have to do some expert witnessing, as testifying in court. While I was working for Fisher, I started and finished a master's degree, Master of Civil Engineering at the University of Houston. Finished that in 2001 with a GPA of 3.48, so my master's GPA was much higher than my undergraduate GPA, even though during my master's I was working full-time, going to school at night, and again, this was a civil engineering program, so tough program. An MCE, a Master of Civil Engineering, is supposed to be a terminal master's, meaning you're not planning on going on to get a PhD. Obviously, since this is Office Hours with Dr. Dan, I did decide to go do that later, so things have a way of changing. In 2002, I started my own company, Rich Engineering, still doing failure analysis. Again, that's what I'm doing still to this day as the video is recorded. Again, that's expert witnessing and failure analysis. While doing Rich Engineering, I started a PhD at Texas A&M, so I was commuting between Houston and College Station, and that's about a 2-hour drive each way, so I did that for several years while I was completing the coursework for the PhD, and then it took several years to finish my dissertation that was based on the research that I did. My dissertation was dealing with soil compaction, modeling soil compaction under a vibratory roller. Very, very boring. If you ever have insomnia, you can go online and find a copy, and you'll probably be asleep before you finish the abstract. While I was doing the PhD and still running Rich Engineering, I started teaching as an adjunct professor at Prairie View A&M University in the Civil Engineering Department. I taught there 5 out of 6 years between 2008 and 2014. Taught 10 different classes, most of those classes multiple times. One of those classes was dual undergrad-grad class, and 2 classes were special topics classes that I developed that had not been taught before. Again, finished the PhD in 2010 with a GPA of 3.59. So if you see the undergrad GPA when I was just a full-time student, nothing else to do but worry about being a student, was 3.17. Then the master's was 3.48 while working full-time, and then the PhD while running my company, being a professor for part of the time, and commuting between Houston and College Station was 3.59. So if I knew then what I knew now, my GPA in undergrad probably would have been a lot nicer. But as I'll talk about in some of the upcoming videos, there's having a respectable GPA, which is good, and then, so you don't need a 4.0 to go out and get a job and have a reasonably successful career. Again, we'll go in that more in depth in a future video. Starting in 2013, I've been a self-published fiction author. I have a couple of books available through Amazon. It's more of a fun project for me. Books critically have done reasonably well. As far as sales go, I'm not giving up my day jobs yet to become a full-time writer. Now, going on to what kind of topics you can expect on this channel, what kind of subjects you can expect, and in no particular order. I have what I'm calling like off to a good start. When you get to the beginning of the semester, what are some things that you should look at the beginning of the semester to help make your life easier as you go forward through the rest of the semester? And at the same time, at the end of the semester, a quick review of what went right, what went wrong, so that at the beginning of the next semester you're not making the same mistakes, or you can improve upon things that started to go well during the last semester. Dropping a class. I had to drop, well, I don't know that I had to drop, but I chose to drop several classes during my time, both as a undergraduate and during my PhD program. What are the possible repercussions of dropping a class? Grades, do they matter? Short answer is yes, grades matter for a finite amount of time after you finish school, and then it's kind of like, who cares? Asking for a letter of recommendation. At some point you may need a letter of recommendation, and there is a good way to ask for a letter of recommendation and a bad way to ask for a letter of recommendation, because I've written several letters of recommendations over the years. I've had to ask for letters of recommendation over the years. The syllabus. Syllabus is the roadmap or the blueprint for the semester. How does that work? What's some information that you can get from that to help plan your semester? One of the things that the late Dr. Randy Pausch said is that going to school is like going to the gym. You get out of it what you put into it. I mean, if you go to the gym and all you do is show up and stand around and don't actually do any of the exercise, like, yeah, you went to the gym, but you didn't really put the effort in. And the same with your education. It's your education. You should be choosing what you're majoring in. Within that major, you have some opportunities to choose some electives. It's your education. Make it yours. Put the time in. Another video, getting out of school as quick as you can. My undergrad was 4 years, crammed a lot into that because that's what was expected. Sometimes there's a temptation to drag how long you're in school out, and sometimes there's good reasons for that, and other times it's like, well, it's costing a lot of money and you're giving up potential income the longer you're in school. Community college versus university. I'm a big fan of community college for in the right situations, and as long as the research is done that if you're thinking, well, maybe I want to go on to 4-year school after this, as long as you've made sure that what you've done is transferable, so you're not just throwing money away. Internships and summer jobs. Back in my day, it was called a summer job. We didn't have these things called internships. It's like you went out, you got a job over the summer. It was a summer job. It wasn't an internship. And in the engineering field, you're going to get paid for your internships. Engineers don't do unpaid internships. It's just very rare for that to ever be a good idea. Maybe some of you are thinking about wanting to be a professor. It's like, okay, well, what does a professor do other than just teach? Some advice on group projects in another video. Group projects can be a real pain in the neck in school because, in real life, there's a lot of working together as a group, but in real life, there's this thing called the boss. And if someone's not pulling their weight, the boss can put the hammer down and make that person do the work or fire them. Well, when you're a student and it's a bunch of other students in there, there isn't the boss. There may be the group leader or the project manager, but there's not the boss. So how do you work in a group? Studying for a test. There's a lot of videos out there studying for a test, but from a professor's perspective, what are we looking for when we're putting a test together? And on that with the professor, what do you do if you have a problem with the professor? Do you go right to the president of the university and complain that someone's assigning too much homework? There's a way to handle a problem with a professor or a teaching assistant so that you don't go and do the nuclear option when you really don't need to. If there's a laboratory component of the class, what are some things you can do to be better prepared for the laboratory? And then one of the big questions of to grad school or not to grad school. If you're finishing your undergraduate degree, is it necessary for you to go get a master's to be able to do well in a specific career field? When are the good times to pursue a graduate degree? In my case, with my graduate degree, it was much later in life. As I said, I went, into the Air Force for 4 years. I was working for a company for a couple years before I started my master's, then finished my master's, went out on my own, was working for myself for a few years before I started the PhD. So going right from your undergrad into your master's, sometimes that's a good idea, sometimes that's the best thing to do, and then other times not. So hopefully you'll find the future videos to be useful and informative, and take care until next time.